Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Kappa podcast. Super excited to have Jerry Liu on today, creator of LlamaIndex, who is, of course, on a mission to provide the sort of central interface to connect your LLMs with lots of external data. And it's such a cool time to be chatting as well, Jerry, as LlamaIndex is in such a rocket ship journey. Kind of before the call, I went on and kind of checked out GitHub stars, and I think just in the beginning of the March, I guess we're at like 4,000 stars, and now that's almost at 8,000, right? So what a time to be building. And maybe by way of quick introduction, you also went full time on this project a couple of weeks ago. Maybe let's start the conversation there. How's that transition been, and how are you feeling?
Yeah, it's been I've been feeling great. Thanks, Emil, for having me on the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks for the support through all this, especially with the kapa.ai bot on the Discord channel. It's been a super big help. I feel very excited, but I've felt very excited these past few weeks, and I also feel excited about the future. I, left my full-time job a few weeks ago and have been working full-time on this project. And so it's given me a lot of time to think about a lot of the different dimensions that goes into, trying to grow this from a kind of open source project into eventually building a company around it. So there's just a variety of things. One is just figuring out what the short-term features to build are and keeping up with the latest advances. So, ChatGPT, GPT-4, all the other models coming out from all the other model providers, working on cool demos and integrations with existing services. Kind of being able to manage some, very active and passionate contributors in the community and helping them kind of create really cool demos and features as well. And then, starting to think about some of the long-term vision of the project and eventual company.
Super cool. I mean, what an exciting time to be building now what is turning into LlamaIndex. Maybe just go back a couple of months, Jerry. It would almost be interesting to hear a little bit about the early motivations behind, I guess back then GPT-Index, and kind of what got you started building it.
Yeah, so I think it was actually probably a combination of like a few different factors. One is, I've always been interested in generative models. I think the first AI model I've ever played around with was a generative adversarial network. And so this is back in college, back when I think GANs were one of those things that, they generated some pretty pictures. And that was the moment where I thought, hey, this is actually really cool. These images actually look somewhat realistic. I want to play around with them a little bit more. So I've kept tabs on, generative models across both images, text, and other formats throughout the years, throughout my working career as well. And kind of almost recently started getting into playing around with the capabilities of current LLMs a bit more. And they've definitely increased a lot in capability in the past few years. And I think it's one of those things where when the error rate was relatively high, it was cool to maybe play around with it, and you were impressed when it would generate something somewhat human-like, and you would leave it at that. But once it started gaining all these advanced kind of higher order capabilities like reasoning and all these things, that's when people actually started wanting to depend on the space technology to build applications on top of it. And I think I caught it at a perfect time when people were just discovering the capabilities of GPT-3 and eventually ChatGPT of not only just being able to generate stuff in its own right, but given some existing piece of content, how can we actually reason about it and use it to fulfill different types of tasks. And so that was where I wanted to build some initial app. I wanted to build like a sales bot. I wanted to feed it some private data, and realize that there wasn't really any toolkits or existing kind of services that would allow you to ingest arbitrary amounts of data into the input prompt, because input prompt is context limited. And so that's one reason. That's kind of one motivation for me creating this project. And then the other one is probably just like, it's kind of an interesting concept thinking about LLMs as almost like an extension of like a Turing machine. Like if you think about like the language model as this reasoning engine with some limited amount of kind of like space to actually, take in some input and give you some output. But you could augment it with this like external RAM or hard drive or memory, as people call it these days, like what are the interesting possibilities that can happen. And that's actually kind of what motivated the very initial designs of the Llama index, which was the tree index, where we actually just created this like data structure that the LLM could both build itself and also traverse itself, right? And so that was very much an initial design project that I thought was very interesting, which motivated me to launch this project. And eventually, as this project gained some followers, then we extended it into something that was a useful toolkit for everybody.
No, that's such a cool story there, and I think you touched on the tree index, which I think is perhaps one of the more overlooked and coolest ideas in LlamaIndex, right? I think especially now as we're seeing, hopefully for the coming months, the cost of LLMs going down, this sort of alternative data structure really has a ton of potential, right? And I think you also recently did some tinkering with GPT-4 to sort of see it surface again. Any thoughts there on the tree index?
Yeah, I mean, I think, regardless of whether it's practical or not, I think at the very least, it's one of those things that's kind of cool to test the emergent, like multi-step reasoning capabilities of LLMs, because you don't use like embeddings, right? Embedding lookup is almost like kind of cheating. Like the idea of this is to use the LLM itself as a processor to decide, what to look for next and also to synthesize information. So you use the language model for both retrieval and synthesis. And so to me, it's just fundamentally a very interesting exercise. And I think the thing about going from GPT-3 to GPT-4 is it actually does much, much better at this multi-step reasoning. So back when I first launched the tree index, it actually didn't work super well. I think when I came out with the initial tweet, I was saying something like, oh, this is just an exploratory project, for like this class of questions. It actually picks the wrong child nodes to go down. So it would pick information from these nodes that had nothing to do with the query, and then it would hallucinate the answer at the end. But GPT-4, one thing I found is it is much better at actually, identifying the relevant context within each child node and matching it to the query. So basically, as a replacement for embedding-based lookup, actually depending on GPT-4 to answer this like big multiple choice question correctly and picking the choice that corresponds best to the question to explore further. So that's been really cool to see. I think in general, the cost would probably still have to go down a bit more, and latency might have to go down a bit more for this to be a bit more useful in practice. But I think it's nonetheless like a pretty good testing mechanism, because a lot of applications these days depend on multi-step reasoning. And actually, the generalization of the tree index that we have in our framework is this notion of actually you as a user can compose like arbitrary graphs over your data. So instead of us organizing the data for you, you can choose to define the relationships between your data, and we'll be able to traverse those relationships and synthesize the answers that you would want. So it's yeah, exactly. So as cost and latency goes down, like these types of applications where you can train and sequentially step through all of these different data sources and combine the information becomes much more feasible.
It's honestly such a cool example, and every time I see you tweet something more about tree indexes and sort of further the thinking there and what's possible, I get very excited. And maybe just building on that, Jerry, a little bit, would love to hear sort of, maybe a little bit thoughts on sort of where LlamaIndex is heading, right? And I think one avenue that would be interesting to explore, right, is this idea of, now having this awesome catalog of different data loaders that's just increasing almost like at one per day at this rate, right? And now if you take that and combine it with the, increase in context size, right, to sort of new models, GPT-4's 32K context. For example, like where do you see sort of LlamaIndex's role, I guess, is sort of the core of the question in this now, fast moving realm where these foundational models are changing from sort of week to week almost.
100%. I think the central value proposition of LlamaIndex will still be this central interface and almost like management system between your language model and your data. And the way I think about it is the moment you try to deploy your language model to, let's say the enterprise setting, you're going to have just a diverse trove of different types of data sources, from structured data to semi-structured data to unstructured data. Right. And this unstructured data could be raw text, it could be images, it could be, all sorts of just like raw, complex data. Right. And I think it's just very interesting to me because I think there's definitely room for a management/orchestration service to really think about how to connect these data sources to your language model in these 4 different dimensions. 1, making it easy to use. 2, making it cheap. 3, making it fast, and 4, making it actually work well. Like it gives you like the best responses possible. And so we are kind of in the business of really thinking about how to make that interface good for you. And one, but so far what the toolkit has focused on is really on kind of increasing some of the expressive capabilities of how you could connect your different data sources and synthesize different responses given your task. So if you want, for instance, to do a summarization over multiple documents, or if you want to do a compare and contrast query, or if you want to, do some basic fact-based lookup and retrieval, we allow you to do all these things with the set of tools that we provide. And we plan to do that even more, right? And so that's just at a very high level, we want to provide this like core piece of tech that has enough technical complexity and kind of like sophistication so that you can depend on this to really move all your data and kind of trust that this is the best tool for connecting your data to the language model in a way that satisfies all those 4 dimensions I mentioned. So
honestly, Jerry,
yeah.
No, go ahead.
So think about all these trade-offs. No, I mean, so it's been super interesting. I think like, and along these dimensions, there's a few things that we're kind of like actively in the process of planning to do. So one idea is just optimization, right? So thinking about, again, all these different axes, like there's costs, there's latency, there's performance, and especially as at like a tool set abstraction, you have access to basically all the different language model providers and all the different embedding model providers. So how can you best provide this optimization and trade-off to the end user, right? Because, they have all this data. They don't initially have a sense of, how much everything's going to cost and how well everything's going to work if you like embed it with this model and then you try to transfer it into this vector DB. So how do we really help users understand that? And this is going to, continue to be a part of the open source project. And then and eventually we can, once we think about, building a company around this and developing some sort of hosted version, potentially, that would also be something that we would think about there.
I think it's such a cool opportunity you're going after, Jerry. And I mean, as folks that sit a little bit more on the application layer, the use case is very much there. The problem is very much there, especially when you think about the ingestion. So as eager users of GPT, now LlamaIndex, we're super keen to follow along here. One almost point I'd love to sort of close the conversation on. I actually asked a couple of friends, fellow sort of tinkerers as well, mentioned that you were coming on the pod, and they all actually asked for sort of like, oh, you have to ask Jerry about this, because I think the short answer is like a lot of projects start similar to how you started a couple of months ago. Cool idea, cool open source repo. But what you've managed to do in the last couple of months, I think, is phenomenal, right? Growing this out, managing contributors, and so on. So sort of honestly, I would just love to hear a little bit about how you've gone about thinking a little bit about sort of the fundamentals, software design principles as you're scaling out LlamaIndex here. What sort of principles are guiding you to get it to where it is today and where it'll be in the future?
That's actually a really good question. So I think one of the things that I think has made LlamaIndex great so far has been the ease of use. So it offers, relatively speaking, like a high-level API where you can really not think that much about the document that you're taking in. Like you just have a document container around some arbitrary piece of text, which also makes coincidentally the data loaders pretty easy to write. Just like stuff a bunch of text into a document, and then just like throw it into a GPT index data structure, and then we'll figure out the indexing, the splitting, the structuring, and then give you some basic interface so that during query time, you can just query this structure and get back a response that you want. And so, one of the key selling points right now is that, and what makes it so easy to use is it basically takes 5 lines of code to load your data to actually asking a question and getting a result. So that part is pretty cool. And I think that part we probably want to preserve just because just in terms of ease of use, it's something that we think we've done a pretty good job in. Now, going down the stack, I think the one thing that we're actively trying to improve is once we have a lot of these cool components within LlamaIndex, like you have, the kind of index structure itself, you have the query, and then you have like the data that's stored in the index structure. And then you have all these like optimizations and transformations and all these other classes that we're adding to really make this experience optimal for your use case. One thing that we're actually working on improving for the next few weeks to months is trying to make this code base both offer the high-level API, but also offer the modular components so that you can plug and play the different components as you wish in order to kind of better structure your data, right? And so, for instance, if you want to plug and play like the optimizer with your own stack, or if you want to use like the index class for write your own like queries, like these are all things that should be possible. And we believe very strongly in this because this is something that will help us serve not just like the kind of like initial use cases of just getting set up really quickly, but also serve the more advanced use cases once you want more customization. So, I think, this is probably the first time I'm mentioning this, but like we're actually working on this new release, which will come out in a few days. By the time this podcast lands, it might be out already. But basically, it's a huge step towards making some of the modules a bit more modular, and then two, actually helping to create way more efficiency in terms of storage. And so just thinking about some of these abstractions that we offer and offering them to the users in terms of the construct. So stay tuned. I think there will be some pretty exciting changes coming soon.
Awesome. Super cool to hear you expand your thoughts on this topic. Very, very exciting, Jerry.
Of course.
And I think with that, then I suggest we close here. Thanks so much for jumping on and sharing a bit of your time here with the listeners. I thought we managed to cover a bunch of cool topics. So thanks a ton. Any closing thoughts?
No, I mean, thanks, Emil, for your time. This has been great.
All right. Cool. Let's end it here.